Hi! Hey! It's skycat.live! What's up, guys? It's 2:25 p.m. on... sorry, I gotta turn down the damn music, sorry. Too blasty. So there we go. I don't know why video game developers can't make volume correct, but they can't do volume correctly. Please stop doing that so I can move. Please stop doing this so I can move. Sorry, there we go. Sorry, guys. Terrible software, terribly breaking as usual. There we go. Hi, guys. It's Skycat Live. It's August 2nd, 2024. It is a Monday, August 2nd, 2024, and it's about 2:25 p.m. I am doing a Final Fantasy XI Red Mage XP party. And I hope you enjoy. I'm going to switch it over here because I don't have much time to talk. I'm just going to go right to it. There we are. Gotta go get Signet and then leave. Gotta make sure that my cookies are enough. Do I have enough cookies? Wizard cookies. Yeah, I got enough. Okay. If I'm going to be healing, I will just put on a U1. I want Signet. Yes. And there we are. Then we come here. FFXI, Horizon. Yeah, I'll just sit and just chatting as opposed to Final Fantasy XI because it is dead. It is like full-blown dead. And 7 Days to Die is the wrong title. FFXI, Horizon, XP, Party, Public. Done. You did not. Gaming should be Final Fantasy 11. Save. And you say excellent condition, but you're not streaming, so we will stop and start. And we will reload the Creator Studio. You say excellent condition, but you are not actually receiving the signal. I want you to stop. I want you to reload. You receive it once you, yep, I want you, there you go, there you go. You ready to receive? Yes, you are. You're ready to receive. So, start. Okay, need Signet, running back to get on a chocobo. Yes, and my YouTube is live. My Twitch is live. Twitch is live. YouTube. You don't look right. There you go. You look right. And then, make it big. And then mute. And then make it live. And run a mini player. Live. There we go. Okay. And I gotta run my tablet. Sur les tables. Sur les tables. Twitch. And I know that I'm being slow, but I'm getting there. There we go. Okay. Hello, people. How are you today? I'm going to be playing some Final Fantasy XI. Yeah. I walked in the sun. I got a nice tan. I'm, doing well, losing weight and getting exercise done and getting good grades and working out and all that stuff. And the future's so bright that I got to wear shades. Working now, getting good grades, and the future's so bright that I got to wear shades. Let's learn about Scrooge McDuck the Terrorist by the Casual Criminalist.
Welcome. The format, of course, is I've never read this before. Dennis has essentially written me a book, and I'm going to sit here for probably the better part of my workday when you do breaks and everything, and read this book to you. Maybe it'll take more than one day. Let's find out. Let's jump in.
Thank you, the Casual Criminalist. I like the Casual Criminalist with Simon Whistler. I like Simon Whistler, and I think I'm a big fan already. And so we'll do some more Casual Criminalist today.
Crime. There's a lot of faces. Yet upon closer inspection, most of them look terrifyingly human. There's something strangely captivating about the macabre beckoning us to explore.
It is.
For some,
I love
the
mysteries
chase, the
and
challenge of
crime
piecing
and
clues
stuff,
together,
yeah.
the satisfaction of seeing justice served.
Figuring
Sometimes
out
we
what
find
peop-
ourselves
why
magically drawn to
people do
outlaws and
things.
villains for reasons that are not so easily explained.
Yep.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just because people are sick. Like, sometimes I'll be like, yeah, I'm going to skip over the bit
I need
where,
my pen.
where the person's removing people's eyes and inserting
suppose
them
I
into
can-
their butts and then taking them out and eating them. I made that up. Don't quite know how or where the f*** I got that from. But it's like, I'll skip over that bit because I'll be like, I didn't need to read that. And I don't think you need to. People will be like,
Simon, read the disgusting bits. Simon, I can't believe you cut that out.
and I'm like, oh, this channel isn't for you, you sicko.
We're here to entertain, not to heal.
As I always say, less Saw and more CSI. This applies not only to true crime stories, but also to fictional ones. We root for Walter White,
Gotta go get my
Dexter
pen, I'll be
Morgan,
right
and
back.
Tyler Durden with sincere admiration, utterly oblivious to the fact that by idealising them, we've missed the point of the plot entirely. Yeah, I haven't seen Fight Club in a really long time. I definitely with Dexter Morgan, the serial killer who kills the bad guys. I was rooting for him hard through that show. With Breaking Bad, I rooted for Walter White at the beginning, and then very quickly I didn't, because he became a monster.
You and your eyebrows.
Like, no one
No.
was rooting for Walter White by the end of that
Walter
show.
White did
were
not
they?
become a monster.
Surely
the
not. You were
DEA
just
was
like,
the monster.
I hope he either gets killed or his cancer comes back and kills him. That sounds like, I hope his cancer comes back and takes him away from the world, is a phrase that should never be uttered. But in Walter White's case, I was like, oh my god, come on.
Nope. Walter White.
Come on, he deserves it. He became a monster.
No, he didn't.
This is not necessarily
DEA
because we approve
became
of
a
their
monster.
actions, but due to a faint glimmer of recognition. Oh yeah? I don't know about Walter White. Walter White more than like Dexter Morgan. My desire to kill anybody is pretty much zero. But my desire to become a meth kingpin? Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Their primal desire for violence and destruction still lurks beneath the paved surface of civilization, and even though this force rarely erupts, we can sometimes feel its tamed movements in the uncharted trenches of our own psyche. It is with this uncanny blend of horror and self-observation that we peer into the true crime abyss, leaving us wondering if the difference between the perpetrators and ourselves is truly that profound. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes it's like, oh, okay, this person did this because of that. I'd be like, yeah, I mean, like, I could put myself in that position. Well, I don't know. This like, I feel like on one episode I was like, yeah, I could kill someone if necessary. And people were like, whoa, Simon, steady on. And I'm like, is that so unusual? Like, there's definitely situations where it would be like, people do this every day, like legally in like wars and and it's like, yeah, if you're in that position, I'm pretty sure I could do that.
Yep.
Like, and if you think you can't, you probably could, because like the military and stuff really good at training you to be able to kill people. It's kind of what they do. There was something, I don't want to butcher the facts too much, but I think I made a video about this once. There was, until like the mid 20th century, I think it was after World War II, soldiers were really bad at killing other people. They'd be great with guns, they'd be good at all of this stuff, but when it came to killing someone, they were like, oh no, I don't like that, that's another person. And so what they did is they started changing the targets in target practice to cutouts of people, and it made it much easier, and the soldiers became much more effective at killing people. I think this was an American specific example, but I think Vietnam became the first war where this kind of post indoctrination of shooting at targets of people rather than just circular targets became a thing. I'm sure I'm butchering
Incoming
these
emote.
facts, but it was like a crazy statistic jump of how many people were willing to kill people after just like changing what the targets looked like, because the military's really good at getting people to kill people. What a genius insight, Simon. Well done. And when the credits of yet another episode roll, we may be left with the low-key impression of having learned something about ourselves, subdued and sealed away by the much greater force that is our morality. I mean, you're the one watching the guy who has literally 22 writers locked up in his basement.
Incoming tell.
Purposes. You're in no position to disagree, Dennis. We've talked about this. Don't mention the basement. You've got to mention that you're free and happy and living on the outside, Dennis. Come on. Am I right, Dennis?
What you did, you upset him. No, you.
At first glance, this episode unfurls the career of a terrorist, an out-of-control mastermind driven by the lowest of motives, toying with human lives as though they were entirely worthless. I'll report on arguably the most notorious crime series of post-war Germany, committed by a twisted soul that could have gone down in the annals as a disgrace. But let me emphasize the important part here. He could have. He actually became a national hero instead. I just recorded an episode, I can't remember what it was, and it was titled like, oh, it was the Chopper Reed episode that David wrote for me. And David lives in Australia, and he was like, this guy's like revered. And I finished that episode being like, yeah, he's a piece of, isn't he? And apparently he's beloved in Australia as an outlaw. And I'm like, yeah, that's because he told like a really good fictitious story of his life. But the guy's a douche. Or he was. He died. I think it was cancer in the end of the or something. I think he drank so much his liver died. That was it. His liver died. And he got like cirrhosis, not cancer. Is cirrhosis cancer? Is that a type of cancer? Probably not, right? That's just when your liver gets all ruined because you drank too much.
All we gotta do is tell the story right.
This is the story of the most cunning, most intelligent offender we've covered on this channel so far. His genius being reminiscent of an over-the-top movie character. Even though this is a truthful account of real events, every other paragraph will feel like a Hollywood screenplay, yet the deeper we delve into this roller coaster of a case, the more you'll realize this episode is actually all about you. Also, as an unexpected detour
Incoming
from our
party
usual narrative
invite.
journey, we're not dissecting the past, we're confronting it head on. For the first time on the Casual Criminalist, I personally scored an exclusive interview with the elusive mastermind himself, who, despite now leading a secluded life, agreed to share his side of the story with us. Oh, this is cool. Dennis sent me a box. Hold on. He sent me a copy of this dude's autobiography, which is entirely in German. So I won't be reading this later. And a signed photo of the dude. I already like him. It's also in German, but this is still very cool. I didn't crease this, Dennis. I'm sorry. The postal service creased it. I don't know why. The box was quite beat up. It was an experience, to say the least. Easily the weirdest encounter of my entire life. And I say this as someone who was once lectured about Japanese rope bondage by a nun at an airport cafeteria. Okay, I dare propose a wager. Over the course of the next few hours, you'll carve out a vivid image of this perpetrator and forge your own moral verdict about him, and you will feel somewhat certain about your conclusions. Yet once I reveal his utterly surprising response to one specific and very basic interview question, I assure you, any initial conclusions will be upended in an instant. Depending on your interpretation, this might very well be our first episode, where the culprit is genuinely the good guy. Okay, let's see. I feel a little bit biased because I've got his autobiography, he signed this thing for me, but I'll try and be impartial. Okay, let's go. Scrooge McDuck greets his nephews. Hamburg, Germany, 1922. A foreboding calm cloaked the street as if the boulevard of shuttered shops and closed restaurants had been paralyzed with sudden anticipation. No footsteps echoed through the night. No voices betrayed the presence of any nearby pedestrians. Only the distant noise of passing cars broke the silence every once in a while. But if someone had been there to witness the moment, they would have detected a certain unease tugging at their attention. The flimsy piece was deceitful and vibrant to the touch. A premonition of something vast hung heavy in the atmosphere as a sinister pulse wormed its way through the towering facades flanking the street. You could hear it emerge from the Golden Shop windows where high-end household items were flaunted, visible to all, yet out of reach for most. The insidious ticking noise was not a metaphor. It emanated from a makeshift pipe bomb hidden in the housewares section of Hamburg's Karstadt department store.
Oh no.
The good guys put a pipe bomb in a department store, Dennis. It's not a strong start for him. I also do feel like I'm reading a novel. I feel like this is how novels sound in my head when I read them. At the stroke of 1 a.m. I don't know why. It's like that very novel-y voice. The hour hand of a mechanical timer met with an electrical contact, igniting a dance of destruction. Pinpoint sparks shot up from the cellophane wrapping, setting off a series of electrical discharges that raced through the wirings. The moment they reached the black powder core, a resounding boom echoed across the desolate aisles, like a gunshot starting a race against time. The blast upended shelves, cracked floor tiles, smashed hundreds of expensive porcelain items, and sent their fragments flying like artillery shrapnel. The deafening pressure wave reverberated through the corridors, leaving nothing behind but a trail of destruction, debris, and streaks of pulverized glass that drifted slowly to the ground. And then, after the deep rumble had wafted up and down the walls a couple of times, silence settled in again. But not for long. Within minutes, the sounds of sirens heralded the arrival of first responders from every direction. In a flash of red and blue, police cars, fire engines, and ambulances converged on them all, and just like an orchestra, each section played its part in perfect sync. Dennis, mate, this could be a book. I feel like this is it's very, very nice. Like, all of these metaphors are so thought out. I feel like I'm genuinely reading a book.
Oh, I don't deserve you. That's my favorite one.
Really? You know what I like about?
To keep onlookers at bay, the anti-terror squad swiftly set up a perimeter around the Karstadt complex, and just outside the police cordon, paramedics stood ready and prepared for the worst. At the same time, a phalanx of firefighters charged into the smoke-choked building, their faces etched with determination and concern as they scanned every corner for signs of human victims. Yet, despite a backdrop that straight out of a movie, the more pressing concerns were quickly allayed. As it turned out, the building had been utterly empty at the time of the attack, devoid of even the most solitary night janitor. There was no cleaning crew scheduled for that night, and the temporary workers assigned to restock the shelves weren't due to arrive for several more hours. With a deep sense of relief, the experts also confirmed that the damage, while considerable, did not pose any threat to the structural integrity of the building. The tableware section had indeed been reduced to a wasteland. Yet the building itself was virtually unaffected, and so, once any immediate dangers had been dispelled, the real investigation began with a late-night phone call, summoning one of Hamburg's most capable investigators to the scene. As Detective Michael Dalecki's car glided through the city minutes later, his piercing blue eyes remained focused on the road ahead, and his calm face betrayed the extraordinary wisdom that he'd amassed through his accelerated career. As the chief investigator of Hamburg's police, Dalecki wore his authority with the same ease as his neatly pressed suit, a testament to the balance he had struck between the demands of his job and the compassionate nature that defined him. It's like a movie, Dennis. I'm like, it's like, I am imagining this playing out like a movie in my mind. This should be a movie. Is this a movie in Germany? At this point in his life, he had been quite the public figure. The media had taken to calling him the genius every once in a while, and not without reason. His ability to unravel even the most twisted and convoluted of cases was the stuff of noir folklore, and his file of awards and commendations could paper the walls of his office, so to speak. The air was still stained with the acrid tang of explosives when Dalecki arrived. From the outset, the prospects were looking grim. The forensics team painted a bleak picture of their findings, or rather, a lack thereof. No eyewitnesses, let alone suspects, no fingerprints on the bomb's components. It is amazing how, like, a bomb can go off, and the police will be like, yeah, we'll find the pieces, and we'll place it back together, like a jigsaw puzzle, and then maybe we'll get some fingerprints off them. And it's like, it was a bomb! It literally blew up! And even though rudimentary DNA analysis was a tool available in 1992, any traces of biological material would have been incinerated anyway. The security cameras had been skillfully dodged by the person who'd placed the explosive device during the previous day, and for all they knew, the culprit might as well have been a ghost. A fast-paced tide of updates ebbed and flowed, each incoming report as illuminating as a match in the Mariana Trench. It seemed as if the case had reached a dead end before it had even begun. On the other hand, Inspector Dalecki felt as if he was missing something blindingly obvious. His subconscious mind tried to point his attention towards a certain memory, but surely he was just fooling himself. Being a man of facts, he decided to disregard his gut feeling for now. I feel like I'm a man of facts. Like, definitely. My logic side of the brain works overtime compared to the other side. But that gut feeling about stuff is often not like, that's not like the opposite of logic. I feel that that's that feeling you get about something because you have so much knowledge. Not that I have like some super knowledgeable brain, but it's like, you know, when you've accumulated knowledge about something and then you have a feeling about it. It's not just completely unfounded. It's like all of that knowledge is like in the back of your mind.
All the previous
like
cases of this before leads me to believe this.
You know what I mean? Like
know?
that,
Yeah.
there's a book about this, like the chunked knowledge and stuff, about the chess masters, where it's like they make the moves even though they're not really aware of why it's quite so good. Their brain's like working subconsciously on why it's so good. You know what I mean? Lost in those thoughts, he ran his finger across the film of ash and cinder that blanketed the floor. In his experience, the absence of evidence could sometimes speak volumes as well, so his mind began to inventory everything that seemed to be conspicuously absent. First and foremost, human victims. Bomb technicians had quickly been set to reverse engineer the triggering mechanism, confirming the chosen time frame was neither a technical fluke or a matter of luck, but a deliberate choice by whoever designed it. Yeah, I mean, if that happened, I think my first feeling as a cop would be, the timer went off at the wrong time. They set it for 3 a.m. instead of 3 p.m., like when the store would be heaving. Like, if someone places a bomb, like a terrorist, assuming a terrorist is a pipe bomb, they generally want to kill people, not just blow up a department store. But the fact that that was deliberate, super interesting. There was that famous story where there was some terrorists somewhere, and they set the timers like they got the time zone wrong or something. So they set it by like the wrong time zone, and then they were going to like they were suicide bombers. They were going to go, or they weren't suicide bombers. They were going to place the bomb somewhere, and it went off an hour early and blew them all up. Good. Murder, or even attempted murder, could therefore be ruled out, and good old terrorism appeared rather unlikely as well, as violent extremists typically strived for maximum carnage. Then again, Karstad wasn't just a random chain of malls, not in the least. For centuries, the company stood synonymous with a lifestyle of economic pride, national wealth, and opulence. The brand's name carried a rich tapestry of historical significance and symbolism that almost reached back to the birth of Germany itself. This sounds like Harrods or Selfridges, right? What do you have in America? What's the Harrods of America? Like, I feel like it's
Walmart?
in New York, right? You got that big shopping street. Is it Fifth Avenue?
Saks Fifth
Something
Avenue.
like that.
Saks
Is
Fifth
there
Avenue.
some like big
Saks
store
Fifth Avenue.
that's like super nice and have all this
Yeah,
cool
Saks
inside?
Fifth Avenue.
It's really expensive.
Saks Fifth Avenue.
Good deli. Ever
Saks
since
Fifth
the first
Avenue.
emperor had been crowned, Karstad would gladly align itself with those who currently held the reins of power. If you know anything about European history, then you're probably aware this is not necessarily a good thing. In other words, I don't know, it's a business. It survives. Like, you know, you gotta do what you gotta do. You don't want to take it too far. You don't want to be like IBM. Right, it's like, what are you working on, IBM? Oh, we're working on a system to document the Holocaust. Oh, okay. That was IBM, right? I don't want to get it wrong and shout IBM out for doing something horrible. Pretty sure it was IBM, allegedly. In other words, Karstad was an obvious target for several types of
What is
political
this now?
extremists.
What did he say? It was like...
We're working on a system to document the Holocaust. Oh!
Working on a system to document the Holocaust. IBM working on a system to document Holocaust. What? IBM and the Holocaust. What? God, oh no, I'm out of mana. You shouldn't have pulled. It's alright, I'm just gonna ignore it. Did you know IBM leased Nazi Germany computers? Get out of the fucking wall. You're so annoying. Why did the fucking...
You've been examined. Incoming tell. Incoming tell. Incoming tell. Incoming tell.
You gotta do what you gotta do. You don't want to take it too far. You don't want to be like IBM. Right, it's like, what are you working on, IBM? Oh, we're working on a system to document the Holocaust. Oh, okay. That was IBM, right? I don't want to get it wrong.
It was.
Shout IBM out for doing something
It
horrible.
was. Yeah.
Pretty sure it was IBM, allegedly. In other words, Kosnow is an obvious target for several types of political extremists. If it came down to that, Adelecki concluded they should receive a confession letter shortly.
I can't believe IBM.
The first light of dawn had barely crept over the horizon when the task force got their assumption confirmed. A cell of radical anarchists publicly claimed responsibility for the attack. According to their statement, the bomb had been intended to protest Western consumerism. Only a few years prior, the same group had carried out a similar attack at an empty office building, lending their words a sheen of credibility. This is so stupid. Like, how are you going to protest Western consumerism by setting off a bomb? Yeah, it's really going to do a lot to stop people shopping. Well done. It's just insane. Like, and they did it at an office building, not even a shop. Yeah, by the date after another letter arrived at the Karstadt branch, this one not only contained a written message, but also a drawing of a custom metal piece that had been used in the bomb's construction, proving the authenticity of this author beyond any doubt. Therefore, authorities directed all their attention towards the new one. The contents were remarkably straightforward. In rather plain language, the sender demanded money. No socio-philosophical outpourings, no political stipulations. The request was as austere as it was simple. Give me 1,000,000 marks, or there will be another explosion in a different Karstadt store, but one way more powerful. There's a note here. A German mark was the currency before the introduction of the euro. I remember this. I remember going to Germany when there were German marks. I can't remember quite what... I think you got 3 German marks for every £1. Feels about right. This must have been in the early 2000s, late 90s. We used to go... We'd have this crazy school trip every year where we'd go to the German Christmas markets in Aachen, which I think is in West Germany somewhere, but it would be a day trip. So we'd get on a bus at like 3 in the morning. That bus would cross the channel. We'd drive to the Christmas market in Aachen, spend like the afternoon or the day in Aachen doing the Christmas markets and buying it. And then we'd drive back and get back at like midnight. It was like a day trip to Germany. It was really far, and we'd do it like every year. I think from like years 1 to 4 at my school, so from like 12 to 16. Something like that. Every year that I had to learn German, which I now don't speak at all. I know that Schmetterling means butterfly. Sorry, so coincidentally, 1,000,000 marks from 1992 is pretty much equal to $1 million today when adjusted for inflation. That makes everything very easy. So he wants
Incoming
$1 million,
emote.
does he? If the company was going to agree to pay the ransom, they were asked to place an ad in a daily newspaper stating this cryptic sentence: Scrooge McDuck greets his nephews. They would then receive further instructions. As Delecky perused the letter for the umpteenth time, he was once again assailed by an uncanny sense of déjà vu. The course of events vaguely mirrored what had happened 4 years prior. Even though this mental connection was more of an instinct than a logical conclusion, everything felt strangely reminiscent of that one cold case, widely regarded among the most embarrassing blunders in German police history. Could it be him again? Was the unknown perpetrator the same mastermind who fooled the police back in 1988? Yes, it must be him, Delecky contemplated as his adrenaline levels spiked through the roof. Yet he decided to keep this suspicion under wraps until he had the hard evidence to support his hunch. Of course, the note was also scrutinized by an armada of profilers, and indeed they quickly arrived at conclusive verdicts, which would certainly have been helpful to Detective Delecky if those dead-sure assessments had not directly contradicted one another. In the realm of crime novels and movies, there is the common trope of law enforcement never ever bending to the demands of extortionists. Any fan of the genre will find the mantra all too familiar. We don't negotiate with terrorists. Yeah, except governments negotiate with terrorists and like blackmailers all the time. Yet in reality, this concept couldn't be further from the truth. Simon recently released a Today I Found Now video about the topic in case you're interested. God, that doesn't feel so recent. When was that? I don't even remember it. But here's a quick summary. Most governments and law enforcement agencies do have some kind of codified rule that precludes any kind of negotiation with criminals and terrorists as a means of deterrence. Yet, it is a very open secret that these principles are constantly being breached for obvious reasons. Yeah, happens all the time. Isn't like prisoner exchanges like a classic example with that? Like the Russians aren't. The Russians arguably not terrorists. And they did that prisoner exchange where they got that basketball player, the woman who got arrested for like having weed or whatever, and they exchanged the merchant of death for her. So I'm like, that sort of negotiation goes on all the time. I'm not saying like that that's negotiating with terrorists, but it's like, yo, you got the merchant of death, and in exchange America got a basketball player who got arrested for having a little bit of weed on her or something. Wasn't it even a frame up or something? First of all, we need to consider Karstadt's image, which was like a Picasso painting. Not that good at second glance. It was so harsh. I will spare you the details. Let's just say they paid compensation to the Jewish community in the late 1940s. You fill in the blanks. Executive management was hell-bent on not appearing like a bunch of sociopaths who would put avarice before human life, a clever strategy, sometimes called public relations. Reportedly, they not only offered to pay the ransom out of their own pockets, but they also considered adding a little tip to the requested sum at some point, just to make sure the elusive monster was entirely satisfied, not even as a trap to catch the man behind the curtain, but simply to fulfill his demands. They basically begged Detective Dalecki to simply let them comply, though there are sources contradicting this notion. I mean, this is all well and good, but that really encourages terrorism. It's like, yeah, we just paid it. We were happy to pay it. You could just be like, yeah, so I didn't set off a bomb, but I'm going to. Like, you just like vague threats. And I only want 10 grand. So come on, let's go. Give me my marks. But more importantly, extortionists are rather stupid on average, meaning they will often screw up when given the opportunity. The German Special Operations Unit reports that nearly all police-guided cash handovers result in the extortionist's arrest, a trend echoed globally. Nearly all? How dumb are these people? The worst case scenario of a criminal escaping with the money is statistically negligible, but let's insert an almost for foreshadowing purposes. The decisive factor, however, only discernible to an expert investigator, lay in the date on the ransom note stamp, showing it had been sent off before the bomb's detonation. Basically, every single extortionist in the history of recorded criminology had made their demands only after the leverage had taken effect. They accounted for the possibility of failure. Or what if the bomb had failed to detonate? What if it had been discovered and defused hours ahead of the scheduled time? But this person had no such contingency, no concept of defeat. They were either a full-blown narcissistic psychopath, or they'd done this before. Both possibilities made it exponentially more likely that they were willing to follow through with their threats. After weighing the various factors, it was ultimately decided to comply with the request and respond in the desired manner, so the agreed-upon signal graced the very next issue of the local newspaper. Scrooge McDuck greets his nephews. It read in bold, black ink, an innocuous sentence laden with heavy significance for only a small circle of insiders. Then again, what is the meaning of that phrase? Moving forward, the media will start referring to the nameless extortionist exclusively by Scrooge, and he will gladly accept the name for himself. So in case you're not an expert on the lore of Donald Duck comics, here's a quick rundown. Scrooge McDuck's the rich dude, right? He has that giant tower of money. So I was always like, that's awesome, and he just swims in it. And there was that amazing Family Guy sketch where Peter jumps into like his own giant pile of money, and he's like, he breaks all of his bones, and he's like, oh no, money is a solid, not a liquid. Donald Duck is a wealthy, anthropomorphic duck-shaped capitalist pig created by Disney. He's a duck, Dennis, not a pig. Known for his insatiable thirst for wealth and his ruthless pursuit of profit. This bourgeois enemy of the working class first appeared in a comic strip written and drawn by Karl Barks in 1947, and he serves as a child-friendly manifestation of selfishness ever since. When I was a kid, I was like, awesome, he's rich. Message home.
Oh, no.
It's
Scrooge
always a
McDuck
completely
is a
wrong message.
fucking asshole.
Not like that guy's a capitalist pig, but I'd love a tower full of money. But
love
beneath
a
all of his
tower full of
superficial
money.
riches, he's also
It's true.
shown to have a heart of gold. The essence of his character seems to be the following insight: there's more to life than money. Scrooge McDuck learns this lesson in every other comic that he's involved in, only to forget this newly acquired wisdom by the time the next comic is published, so he can learn it all over again. Even though he is a portrayal of reckless greed, he is not a glorification of such traits, but a critique. Yet if that is the case, why choose him as an alias for your very reckless and greedy extortion games? Well, we'll come back to this question later, but feel free to speculate in the meantime. Spoiler alert, you're as wrong as all of those aforementioned profilers were. My guess would be, it's like just irony. I guess I'm wrong, because I'm not a profiler. The profiler's got it wrong, so I'm also going to be wrong. But it's just like, you know, took away, like me, took away the wrong message. Stop it. But it's nice to have a giant tower full of money.
I think it's very nice, very modest.
A small side note, Scrooge McDuck is called Dagobert Duck in Germany. I decided to go with the international equivalent for clarity and consistency, yet strictly speaking, the mysterious extortionist was using the German Dagobert Duck. Keep this in mind if you want to decide to further investigate the case after watching this video, or if you're German. There's the autobiography? Biography? Oh no, it's in German, I can't find out. I think it's, Arno Funk wrote this, so I guess it's a biography. Wait, did we find out this dude's name yet? No, maybe this dude's name is Arno. Oh, I still don't know. I think it is Arno. I'm trying to read this dude's signature, and I think it says Arno Funke, so I hope that doesn't spoil anything. Over the last few days, Dalecki and his team of investigators looked out for Scrooge's reaction with a queasy feeling. Would he reply through the newspaper? Was he going to send another letter by mail? What exactly were they even searching for? They had been working non-stop on this case for days now, grasping at every straw to no avail, and the weight of it was beginning to show. A few policemen had even started studying Donald Duck comics just in case, despite his... be like, yeah, what are you doing? I'm reading comics! for research.
I see what you did there. Very good. Okay.
Despite his reputation for mental fortitude and thriving under pressure, the case had quickly taken its toll on Inspector Delackey. Sleep had turned into an elusive luxury, and excessive amounts of bitter coffee made both his mind and his heart race non-stop. But among all those uncertainties, there was one thing they somehow knew for sure. Many stages of escalation lay ahead of them. My words can hardly convey just how spot on their instincts were about that. The radio silence dragged on for 2 seemingly never-ending weeks. To everyone's surprise, when Scrooge finally did reach out, he did so by simply calling the car start service hotline from a public phone booth. While this method of contact ranked low on the list of expectations, the task force had fortunately prepared for this eventuality. An officer, rather than a random employee, answered the call as a recording device captured each syllable for later analysis. Scrooge obviously did not take the risk of engaging in a personal conversation. Instead, he played a tape recording of an extremely distorted and pitch-shifted voice, relaying yet another set of instructions. The barely intelligible message guided investigators to a specific luggage locker at Hamburg's main railway station. Afraid of finding another explosive in there, the emergency services sped off with no delay. Yet when the bomb squad carefully opened the locker and inspected its contents, they discovered something else entirely, a mechanical contraption of metal and mystery, whose purpose was difficult to tell at first glance. Oh my god, if I was the bomb squad, I'd be like, it is a bomb. Like, you looking for a guy who plants bombs, and you open a locker in a public place and there's a mechanical device in there, you're like, Being the bomb squad's gotta be fucking terrifying. Your job is to just go up in that big suit and deal with bombs and possibly get blown up. And I mean, how useful is that big suit? If a bomb goes off, it's a bomb! Imagine a backpack with an elaborate metal chassis and magnets attached to the rear side. Neither the explosive experts nor Inspector Delackey have ever seen anything like it before. Fortunately, the ominous object came with a short user manual of sorts, written in the familiar font of Scrooge's typewriter. The ominous device was a self-developed high-tech solution for secure money delivery, the letter explained. A self-developed high-tech solution for secure money delivery? What is this? It instructed police officers to place the money into the bag-like component and fasten the zip tightly. Once the cash was safely stowed inside, they were supposed to attach the entire apparatus to the rearmost carriage of a specific train. The magnets were aligned precisely to fit the outer coupling mechanism. The ingenious twist inside the metal box was a clock mechanism, very similar to the one that triggered the bomb previously. Oh, it's going to drop it somewhere, isn't it? It's going to deactivate the magnets, like electromagnets or something, at a specific point, and drop it along the line where the guy will be waiting. But instead of setting off an explosion, it would release the hooks holding the bag component at a certain time. The money-filled container would therefore drop onto the rail bed at some secret point during the train's journey at a predetermined location, known only to Scrooge himself, who would merely gather the spoils from the tracks and vanish like a wisp of smoke. On the backside, Scrooge provided the exact train they were going to use. It was an intercity express named Kathy Kollwitz, scheduled to travel from Hamburg to Berlin. And there is a note here: every train in Germany is named after an important person. Kathy Kollwitz was a painter and sculptor and one of the most famous German artists of the 20th century. I always feel it nice when you're on it. It feels so fancy when you get on a train. It's not like, you know, the A17. It's like the Kathy Kollwitz or the Albert Einstein. You're like, wow, look at this. Scrooge's plan seemed completely ridiculous, but undeniably brilliant. You see, the two cities were almost 300 kilometers apart. There was no way to deploy officers across the entire route. Delackey's gaze darted back and forth between Scrooge's device and the policemen who surrounded him in eager anticipation of orders. The train in question was due to depart in a couple of days. Maybe there was enough time left to gain the upper hand after all. The police technicians found themselves tasked with a new objective: reverse engineer the gadget, figure out the timer's configuration, and then calculate the location at which Scrooge would be waiting for the cash. It was his engineering expertise against that of the entire police force, which does sound like an easy win on paper, doesn't it? It does. I mean, I can think of ways that you could do this now, where you could do it, like with encryption and stuff, where they wouldn't be able to break into it and figure it out. But is this a mechanical device? I mean, surely. How can you... I mean, I wouldn't know how to possibly hide something like that in a mechanical device. As the nerd set about analyzing the device, Delackey and the head of operations once again exchanged weighted glances. There was no denying the truth. Scrooge was the very same criminal who had outsmarted the police 4 years prior. The modus operandi was more refined this time, but essentially identical. Could this be their shot at redemption, a chance to rectify a humiliating defeat? Though Delackey was not directly involved with the catastrophic failure from 1998, he took the challenge somewhat personally. The entire German law enforcement had been outsmarted by a criminal genius, humiliated, ridiculed, and relieved of 500,000 German marks. The memories of this bitter defeat had haunted thousands of crime fighters ever since. Maybe This was their fateful opportunity to rectify a major slip-up. Oh no, I'll just be thinking, oh, it was really hard the last time, and now we're going to get taken again, and it's going to be for twice as much. The detective's sentimental contemplation was interrupted when the technicians announced a surprisingly swift breakthrough. Scrooge had made a grave error by simply recycling the design of the bomb's trigger mechanism, which was both familiar and rather simple to begin with. After unscrewing the box and ransacking the inner blend of wires and security and circuitry, they had discovered that everything was connected to a slightly modified alarm clock set for 5:52 p.m. This is way too obvious. This is way too obvious. Although Scrooge had disabled the display, they could easily reconstruct the alarm time. The detectives huddled around a map, feverishly calculating the precise location of the train at the moment of the drop. It was a mathematical conundrum everyone had encountered countless times during their school days, never imagining that one day it would be the key to potentially saving lives. The location they pinpointed was a minuscule village, barely a blip on the map, nestled 100 kilometers from the bustling city of Hamburg. Oh, you guys are getting taken for a ride. This was too easy. It's a red herring. Maybe the train's just going to go all the way to the final destination where the guy just grabs it. It just gets into the station and he's waiting there just to collect the money. It never drops off, or he takes it at before it leaves or when it pulls into a station, something like that. Or maybe it will drop at that point. Yeah, that's okay. That's what I'm thinking what's going to happen. So this train is obviously going to stop several times along its 300-kilometer journey. And if there was no mechanism, the only point that he could collect the money would be when it pulls in to specific stations. So the police would be stationed at every specific station along the route. But by dropping it off at some point along the route at this tiny little village, the police are going to wait exclusively there. So if I were the police at this point, I would very much, just in case, station people at that tiny village where it's due to drop, but also I would station police at one, on the train, looking out the back, and then two, also at every station, right? That's the checking all the boxes plan. At exactly 4:40 on the specified day, Kathy Corvitz roared out of Hamburg's main station with the ominous device firmly attached to its rear. Members of the Scrooge task force sped down the highway in unmarked cars hours ahead of the Intercity Express. They mentally prepared for the inevitable arrest and their well-deserved moment of sweet, sweet victory. Oh, guys, we're 10 pages in. It's not happening. They envisioned Scrooge standing in the middle of nowhere, nervously watching the tracks, waiting for his ill-gotten gains to fall into his hands, completely unaware of his impending doom. The cat-and-mouse game was building up to the climax. The team had arrived early, leaving them to stew in the seemingly indeterminable stretch of time before the big showdown. With the villagers ushered into their homes for safety, the assembled officers assumed their hidden positions, scanning the area for anything out of the ordinary. They slinked from one vantage point to another, ensuring every possible angle was covered. And then, when all preparations for the surprise party were completed, the suspense began. The moment, the minutes inched by, and the tree's shadows grew ever so slowly. The policemen fixed their gaze on the tracks where their adversary was due to materialize at any moment now. Despite not being physically present himself, Dalecki was filled with an overwhelming sense of tension as he anxiously awaited news from the field squad. Waiting back at the headquarters, his thoughts drifted to 1988 when Scrooge, then still under a different name, had pulled off a very similar plan successfully. But not this time. Not again. The sun had dipped low in the sky by now, casting a golden hue over the surrounding field, but no trace of the extortionist was in sight. The small army of officers still hunkered down, hidden within the bushes and trees. But nothing happened. After a while, frustration and confusion crept in, eroding their initial confidence. Had they somehow gotten the drop site wrong? Maybe Scrooge had caught on to their plan and changed his mind. I mean, why are they so sure that he's going to collect it immediately after the train goes past? It's just going to be on the tracks. He could come by an hour or two later and collect it. He could come by days later and collect it, assuming that he doesn't think the police are onto him. Eventually, the train's headlights crested the horizon in the far distance. Kathy Colvitz approached the ambush spot at exactly 5:52 p.m., just as they had calculated. With a hiss of compressed air and squeezing brakes, the vehicle came to a halt. No suspicious figure appeared anywhere. The ensuing silence seemed to mock the investigators' confusion as they slowly began to understand that they were very, very screwed. The metal box was still dangling off the last carriage, but the bag of money was gone. The extortionist had outplayed them a second time, and now they stood there in the middle of nowhere, shaking their heads in disbelief. The trick was blindingly obvious. In a stroke of twisted genius, Scrooge had placed a second timer inside the box, completely concealed from view. The visible one was nothing more than a ruse, a decoy designed solely to lead investigators astray. The true mechanism had triggered mere minutes after the train left Hamburg. While the police officers were prematurely celebrating and getting into position for victorious arrest, Scrooge had already absconded with the money. Okay. That's, I think my plan's better. Just go to a station and pick it up. Like, if you got the decoy one in there and a real one, there's still the chance that they can discover the real one. I mean, they didn't, but they could have. As the reports reached Dalecki back in Hamburg, he couldn't help but marvel at Scrooge's cunning. This was a game of chess played at the highest level, he thought, but it wasn't checkmate just yet. Scrooge may have eluded capture for now, but Dalecki had set up a multi-layered trap on his own. Scrooge's alarm clock was fake, but so was the money stuffed into his bag. The game was just beginning. The money stuffed into the bag being fake, he's going to discover that very quickly, and then he's going to be like, oh, okay, I guess we're doing another bomb. The pursuit of happiness. In 1950, Arno Funke was born into a world that seemed determined to smother every spark within him. Growing up in Rudau, a rather primitive village in West Germany, his life was imbued with an aura of misery from the very moment he drew breath. Even though roughly 5 years had passed since Hitler's ballistic withdrawal from active politics, the aftermath of the Third Reich continued to shroud the ravaged nation like an everlasting shadow. There was a deep-seated sense of guilt, shame, and remorse, well earned by an awful lot of people. And for those who had staked their lives on opposition to the regime, the sheer scale of inhumane atrocities was still an unresolved trauma. The war remained vividly present to those who survived, with partially disfigured cities and occasionally bombed out buildings serving as constant reminders. Within the time span of only 12 years, the Nazis had industrially murdered 11 million people and started a war that would cost 50 million more lives, and that's not even counting the 30 million deaths that would result from war-related disease and famine. It had been the single worst calamity in the entire history of our species, a magnitude of suffering beyond any human comprehension. I introduced the Pedro Lopez scale of evil in another episode, and just going by the number of fatalities, this scores a 30.3 million out of 10. It is psychologically just impossible to truly grasp any of this, and yet we have a whole nation of people who, for the most part, actively or passively contributed to what had happened. And then, of course, the next disaster loomed on the horizon. Germany had been divided into two parts since 1949, and the extent of this rift was slowly dawning on both sides. While the western part, guided by Allied forces, made slow but steady progress in establishing a self-sustaining democracy, the eastern section seemed to slither from one dictatorship to the next, merely swapping the Nazi Party as their oppressor for the Soviet Union. The potential for escalation was obvious to everyone from the beginning, and as we know today, this global conflict would eventually push the world to the brink of nuclear Armageddon. This was the joyful land of milk and honey into which Arno had been born, a depressing climate, bound to leave its mark on the soul. Information about his formative years pretty limited, compelling us to lean heavily on his autobiography. Ba-da! Along with his anecdotal tales whose origins can't be definitively confirmed. I did my best to weave the individual data points into a coherent narrative, though this was only possible by applying a medium-sized dose of interpretation. The forthcoming section rests upon somewhat unstable ground, but I believe we can piece together a plausible framework from the scattered hints available. To my understanding, Arno was a very special child to begin with. It didn't take long for his parents to notice his strange and peculiar traits. As a toddler, Arno seemed solemnly withdrawn and introspective, ensconced within an invisible fortress that severed him from the world outside. He showed little to no interest in anything. Instead of reacting to voices or engaging with toys, his eyes stared blankly into the void, like a computer processing complex calculations behind a frozen user interface. There was no life sparking in his pupils, but an unfathomable intensity that scared his mother and angered his father. As Arno grew older, his parents remained hopelessly overburdened with his unusual habits, wondering whether they were raising an extraterrestrial. He would only talk when absolutely necessary, completely lose himself in the dullest things imaginable, and react in ways that were just off. Throughout his childhood, he struggled to make any friends. On the one hand, there were only a few peers of his own age living nearby, but on the other hand, communicating with anyone seemed to be an overwhelming challenge to Arno in general. Technically speaking, Rudau was an outskirt district of West Berlin, yet the distance to the actual city stretched so far that it was mostly seen as a separate village in its own right. Life there was rather simple and arguably a little backward even for the time. In the cluster of half-timbered houses and gardens, there was no running water, no sewage system, no continuous electricity supply, and with every little rain shower, the dirt roads transformed into quagmires. It's crazy how, times have changed. No running water in Europe 50 years ago. No, 70 years ago. It's pretty nuts. I mean, I guess there are places now, yeah, I think about it. I have a little house in the countryside that doesn't have running water. It has a well with a pump. I mean, does that mean running water? It's it's in the middle of nowhere. There's no pipes serving it because that would be insane. So there's a well, and you There's a button and you turn it on when you arrive and it pumps water to the... Is that running? Well, I guess that is running water, isn't it? Yet as Arno grew into school age, he found a lot to like about their surroundings. Amidst the bushes, forests, and mud pits, he would encounter one fun adventure after another, even though he continued to take them on alone. Arno was also fond of the desolate allure that emanated from an abandoned railway station south of Rideau, and aware of the profound influence trains would eventually wield over his life. In the pre-modern society of 1950, psychological deviations were often frowned upon and vastly misunderstood. People, even children, were expected to conform to societal norms, and if they couldn't, they were quickly labelled as abnormal outcasts that needed to be punished for their shortcomings. Arno's father lacked empathy and understanding for his son's unique needs. He deemed his behaviour indicative of a flawed character, a problem that he believed could only be resolved through physical discipline. Ah, yes. Let's beat the weird out of him. Consequently, Arno faced regular beatings just for existing the way that he was. For the most part, his father tried to avoid Arno. He hated being reminded of his existence. But if he was somehow forced to deal with the child, he would often resort to violence. The young boy quickly figured out the pattern and how to escape it, by not daring to exist in front of his father's eyes. For the lack of paternal love, he instead sought emotional connection with the nearby farm animals. The Funke family owned a chicken coop behind the house, whose feathery inhabitants quickly became Arno's dearest playmates. He would spend entire days just sitting among them, as if the hens understood his innermost nature better than humans ever could. One day, however, when the smell of dinner drew Arno into the kitchen, he became suspicious at the sight of the meat on his plate. He ran outside to count his friends, and to his shock, one of them was missing. His father found this reaction extremely funny at first, but when Arno flatly refused to eat his best buddy, he exploded with anger in the blink of an eye and spanked Arno into submission. Apart from assaulting his offspring, Mr. Funke pursued a wide range of other hobbies as well, such as drinking excessive amounts of beer, losing money in the lottery, or abusing his wife in front of his son. By the time Arno was 10, the situation had spiraled out of control even further, to the point where his mother just couldn't take it anymore. In early 1960, she made a life-changing decision for Arno and herself, starting a new life free from brutality by escaping to New Cologne, a working-class suburb in the western sector of Berlin. You might assume that a violent and possessive tormentor would make every effort to keep his punching bags in his clutches. Yet much to my surprise, Mr. Funke neither applied any force nor psychological pressure. Quite the opposite. His indifference towards his family apparently outweighed his seeming narcissistic impulses, so he was mostly fine with the decision and simply allowed them to go. Up to this point, everything sounds like a bit of a parenting guide for those who seek to raise serial killers, but despite all of that, Arno would later describe these early years as the happiest in his entire life. From our perspective, urban Berlin may seem like the lesser of two evils, but according to Arno himself, it was decidedly not. Known for its vibrant art scene, gritty streetscapes and winding alleys lined with trendy cafes and alternative restaurants, New Cologne serves as one of the world's largest hipster hotspots in contemporary times. Yet when Arno ended up there in 1960, it was arguably even worse. Between the rundown facades, it reeked of decay and poverty for miles around. Arguably even worse. The attitude among the locals was rough and governed by social tensions. Neighbours remained strangers, and everyone was drunk at all times. In a cramped and dismal corner of the city, the Funke family had taken up residence in an unassuming backyard hovel, hidden from sight by a labyrinth of shadowy staircases. Arno found himself immersed in a world that bore no resemblance to his former life. Gone were the days of wandering through the woods, communing with the wildlife, and basking in the tranquil stillness of expansive crop fields. In their place, Arno now faced a grimy and treacherous metropolis. Yeah, I would think, if you're poor, right, isn't it better to live in the country where you have a bit more space and there's less crime and stuff and everything's just less expensive, rather than in the city where everything's expensive and there's going to be crime and too many people? And I don't know, I'd always be like, the country sounds way better and you can grow some of your own food, you can have your own chickens. That sounds way nicer. I guess there's more opportunities in the city, so you can get a better job and earn more money, but then everything costs more. I don't know. Does that make sense? His surroundings were a gross mockery of nature. Trees had been replaced with soot-blackened chimneys. Chickens had given way to verminous rats. Lush meadows had been supplanted by foul-smelling landfill sites, and the gentle bird song had been drowned out by the relentless clatter of factory machinery. Arno felt suffocated by the oppressive brick structures that loomed above him, casting a pall over his young life. But soon, he would find that this Charles Dickens hellscape was only the beginning of his troubles. Mrs. Funke, a weary single mother toiling from dawn till dusk to put food on the table, was all too aware of the perils that lurked in the urban jungle beyond their doorstep. In order to shield her son from these dangers, she resorted to locking him away in his room, making him a prisoner in his own home. For reasons known only to her, she subjected him to this confinement not only during work days, but also on most weekends. Perhaps she was unnerved by his peculiar behavior, or maybe she was simply unwilling to face the reality of having a child she never wanted, a fact Arno was thoroughly aware of. In his autobiography, Arno recounted the crushing weight of boredom as the ultimate test of endurance, one that undoubtedly caused lasting damage to his mental health. Also, his isolation did certainly not help to improve his lacking social skills, but it did introduce him to a passion that would come to define him for the rest of his life: art. The boy would spend countless hours hunched over a canvas, his hands a blur of motion as he poured his soul into each stroke of the brush. Through his artwork, he sought a fleeting respite from the drab darkness that threatened to swallow him whole. Despite his young age, Arno's talent for proportions and perspectives was undeniable, and some of his early works still survive as a testament to his prodigious skill. To me, an absolute layman, they look exceedingly impressive, but also very concerning. His motives clearly serve as a reflection of this inner struggle. Children locked behind prison bars, fences and barbed wire in front of meadows, teddy bears brutally pierced with iron spikes. It sounds like the sort of thing, it's like if you did that in school, the teachers would be like,
So, Mr. and Mrs. Whistler, have you, considered your child seeing a psychologist? We just want to make sure everything's okay, because they keep drawing teddy bears with spikes through their faces.
oh no, she seems so normal. As time wore on, his paintings grew increasingly somber, a clear indication that while art may have slowed his descent into the abyss, it would neither halt nor reverse it. Not even the most opaque colour could conceal the empty canvas within him. Mrs. Funke, though aware of her son's disquieting artwork, maintained her iron grip on his freedom. Arno's only reprieve from his confinement came in the form of brief trips to the communal toilet, which they shared with other tenants, and of course, he was allowed to leave for school. Arno attended the notorious Rutley School, a rather problematic institution to this day, plagued by violence and drugs among the students and resignation among the teachers. It had been a catch basin for those without prospects, and Arno blended seamlessly with this backdrop. By no means did he cause much trouble for his teachers. He attended the lessons impassively, often isolated himself to the last row, and constantly lost himself in his own imagination. In terms of academic performance, Arno navigated his early school years as if it was nothing. Failure was quite the norm in this school, yet he seemed to defy the odds. He moved effortlessly through any intellectual challenge, conquering test after test with an ease that belied his reserved manners. Languages, though, were never his strong suit. Arno struggled to wrap his mind around the nuances of both German and foreign tongues, but he managed to pass his exams with little more than a shrug nonetheless. Mathematics and the sciences, however, were a different story altogether. In these realms, his mind raced at the speed of light, drawing connections and solving problems that would have left his teachers gasping for breath if he paid any attention to them. Complicated formulas bent and twisted to his will, rearranging themselves into neat solutions before his eyes. Geometric patterns snapped into place as if guided by an invisible hand, and when he contemplated scientific experiments, a detailed three-dimensional model would materialize in his mind's eye, as tangible as any object in the physical world. This assessment, by the way, was not based solely on Arno's autobiography. Other sources scientifically and reliably confirm his extraordinary intellectual abilities, and we'll have more on those a little bit later. Arno's life of boredom shifted dramatically the day he discovered the wonders of the library. Each day on his way home from school, he would load his arms with stacks of books, which he would exchange for new supplies the following day. Stories of adventure and fantasy held little appeal for him, as he rarely managed to emotionally connect with the protagonists. Instead, he found solace in the crisp, clear lines of non-fiction. Textbooks on technology, electronics, physics, and chemistry became his sustenance, as he devoured them with a voracious appetite. As the weeks and months passed, his academic expertise grew to a level that was nothing short of extraordinary. And yet, this newfound knowledge did not bring him the pride or sense of accomplishment one might expect. Arno had no idea how other people functioned and what intellectual capacity corresponded to the average. Therefore, he failed to recognize that he was exceptional. For him, becoming an expert in basically every type of science was simply a way to fill the endless hours that stretched before him. His mind was a tempestuous sea nonetheless, roiling with feelings of worthlessness and despair that threatened to pull him under at any moment. A black cloud of emotional numbness dogged his every step, casting shadows on any glimmer of happiness that dared to pierce the gloom. But Arno's autodidactic pursuits came at a price. The more he focused on cramming the entire body of engineering wisdom into his brain, the less seriously he took school. Soon he had intellectually transcended so far beyond the reality of the classroom that he had completely lost touch with the topics the teachers discussed. The school's climate of self-abandonment had caught up with him at some point, even forcing him to repeat 2 years of school after failing most of his exams. This was, and is, common practice in the German educational system, even though scientific studies have repeatedly showed that it is among the worst things one could do to a struggling student. Really? To have them repeat a year? But what happens if they do fail? Can they go on to the next year? They don't know how to do stuff, and then they're just going to be extra lost. How do you deal with that? Even I, the author of this episode, have been forced to repeat 2 of my school years, somewhat ironically for failing my English exams. This is crazy. Dennis's English is better than mine. I would have no idea that this was written by someone who didn't speak English as a first language, and it's certainly much better than anything I could possibly write.
Dennis has done it!
Among other things. Yet here we are. Shout out to Mr. Landstein, my former English teacher, who called me a hopeless failure instead of providing me with any kind of support.
He did anyway. I slit his throat.
In fact, you know, funny parallels. My German teacher was kind of a bit of a... In fact, this horrible experience was the catalyst that led me to pursue a career as a high school teacher myself, with the lofty intention of providing my students all the attention and care that was missing in my own educational journey. Unfortunately, within my first week of working at a school, I understood that the problem is not only the person in front of the classroom, it is the entire educational system that needs to be overhauled, perhaps even completely replaced.
Exactly.
I gave up on this career path. Yeah, the educational system is in for a hell of a shake-up, though, isn't it?
It is.
ChatGPT and stuff. Like, you mess around with that, and you don't know, if you don't understand something, it will tutor you to understand it, which is nuts. Like, you can just be like, I don't understand this, can you help me learn it? And it'll be like, absolutely, here's a lesson plan. And you'll be like, okay, let's get going. And it'll just get going. It's crazy. Anyway, Arno did not care about failing school or about literally anything else regarding his future. Instead, he was brooding about gloomy thoughts and unanswerable questions. By the time he had turned into a teenager, he'd internalized the theory of being fundamentally broken, of having some kind of major defect in his head. Maybe there was a tumor growing in his brain, an insatiable black hole that exclusively feasts on positive feelings. At times, he struggled to remember what joy even was. I mean, it does sound like he has a flaw in his brain, but it sounds like the sort of flaw that can, like, be treated. Like, yeah, just, I mean, yeah. But unfortunately, this was the 1950s. As a young adult, Arno's entire life had devolved into a desperate pursuit for happiness, or not even necessarily happiness, but just any feeling at all. He dropped out of school at the earliest possible opportunity, which took away even the faintest semblance of orientation.
Microsoft.
Devoid of purpose, Arno aimlessly meandered through his days, observing the lives of others with the keen analytical eye of a scientist. He dissected the vibrant, bustling world that swirled around him, seeking to replicate the formula for happiness that had eluded him for so long. His theory? By mimicking the actions of those who appeared content, their joy might somehow seep into his own desolate existence. He lacked intuition on how to be happy, so he straight up copied the habits of others. I mean, fake it till you make it. It's not bad, though. Like, there's that whole thing about, like, if you just smile, you'll feel better. And that works, dude. You just be like, I feel miserable. You're just like, ah, ha, ha. And it's like, you do feel slightly better, don't you? It's like, hey, like, I force myself to do that sometimes. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that. And you're like, okay, big smile, let's go. Arno strolled through public parks, indulged in culinary experiences, immersed himself in literary masterworks. He frequented pubs, reveled in the magic of the silver screen, marveled at the exhibitions of every museum that Berlin had to offer. Among the places he visited frequently was the Mall of the West, a sprawling temple of luxury, a glittering monument to opulence hailed as the pinnacle of human contentment. Arno never made a purchase. Instead, he observed the sea of smiling faces, hoping their attitude might someday rub off on him. But it never did. In the evenings of these eventful days, Arno would go to bed without having felt anything, falling asleep to the same sinister thoughts that had haunted him since childhood. Again and again, he consciously decided to have a good time, but it only ever felt fake, forced, a hollow pantomime of genuine emotion. He was a robot unable to process the data of joy. Happiness was a foreign language to him, a concept he could describe only theoretically. The more he tried to do the right things in life, the more his soul withered away. However, Arno never harbored anger or envy. He believed the fault lay solely within himself, a malfunction in his inner workings for which no one else could be held responsible. The following years were a collection of even more false starts. Since nothing and no one could truly stimulate him anyway, he simply let himself drift. He embarked on a series of vastly divergent career paths, each one a vain attempt to find a place where he belonged. He dabbled in sign painting, seeking to harness his experienced hands, but the march of progress and the rise of automation had rendered his skill set entirely obsolete. Turning to the realms of entertainment, he briefly tried his luck as a disc jockey, reasoning that surely a fun profession would foster a fun disposition. Alas, his lack of musical aptitude doomed the endeavor from the outset. He would later drive a truck for a beverage company because finding joy in simple things was a widespread phenomenon, or at least he had heard about that. It didn't work for him. He then turned to manual labor, hoping that physical exertion would spark life within him. Yet his stints as a construction worker and a mechatronics technician, which is a real world, Simon, mechatronics, okay, don't know what it is, left him feeling just as empty as before. What is mechatronics? Look up. Technology combining electronics and mechanical engineering. Well, there you go. Could have guessed that, couldn't I?
One would think.
No matter the job, Arno almost immediately grew apathetic. The monotony of routine chafed at his spirit, leaving him yearning for the freedom and expression that he found in the arts. It sounds like you need to be an artist, mate. I guess there's not a lot of money in that, is there? But you could,
I wish you would have done it for your YouTube channel.
Have a crack at it at least. That seems to be something you do find joy in, like painting. So just drive the truck and then paint. Like, a lot of people do jobs they don't like so they can pursue their interests. My coffee is so cold. I've just been so absorbed in the story. I had a hot cup of coffee when this episode started, and now it is stone-ass cold. He tried time and again to break into the world of commercial creativity as a side hustle. Well, there we go. But each foray led to another failure. Photography offered a fleeting glimmer of hope for a while, but ultimately his innate shyness proved his undoing once more. He felt as if he was intruding on others' private moments with his lens in an unethical way, even though that was exactly what they paid him to do. Fate ultimately led him to a small car repair shop, where he found work as a spray painter. But it was not passion that tethered him there, but the friendship he forged with Heinz, his boss. Quite a big deal for him. This way, he could at least ease his all-consuming loneliness a little. But one must not draw any wrong conclusions. He was still beyond miserable. As he entered his mid-30s, Arno's suicidal tendencies began to take the shape of concrete plans. In his imagination, he had already put an end to it countless times, but had never acted upon it in any way. Nonetheless, when Heinz was looking for a specific wrench one day, he instead discovered a genuine handgun and a single bullet hidden in Arno's personal tool drawer. That was not something people just had randomly lying around, as owning a firearm is a serious criminal offense in Germany. Heinz had been well aware that his employee was in pretty bad shape, but it was only now that he truly understood the extent of his suffering. Upon confronting Arno, the latter explained that he wasn't really planning on shooting himself anytime soon. He just wanted to keep all possible options open. Oh my god. And so, no, I'm not planning on killing myself. I wouldn't discount the idea. Heinz immediately ordered Arno to dispose of the gun, and Arno obliged under Heinz's strict supervision. Yet, in a beautiful twist of fate, this somber encounter strengthened the bonds of friendship between the two men, which led to a positive spin on Arno's general mood. He had never shared his inner darkness with anyone up to this point, and Heinz's sincere attempt at understanding him felt somewhat uplifting. I get the feeling, because that happiness thing is kind of like, it's like this base level that you're at, right? And then you have these events in life, so I imagine that's like cool and his friendship is strengthened, but he's going to return to that kind of base low level, right? Because it just doesn't really change that much. But that was not the only change Arno noticed around this time. He observed a novel peculiarity that made itself felt increasingly often, and it worried him quite a lot. Every other day, he would experience severe episodes of dizziness and disorientation, as if he were heavily intoxicated all of a sudden. His eyes would turn into long, dark tunnels, taking in their surroundings through a thick lens of frosted glass. Everything sounded as if his ears were deeply submerged underwater, and he had trouble keeping his balance. This is, you need to see a doctor. During the following months, these attacks grew in intensity and duration. Within a year, they completely replaced his default state. If that happened to me more than once, I'd see that. Like, if that happened once, I'd be like, oh, that was weird. And it would hopefully it would never happen again. Like, I once had a migraine. Never had a migraine in my life. This was years ago. Never had a migraine since. It was horrible. And I finally understood. I was like, oh, I see. This is like not a headache. This is a absolute disaster. And it went on for hours. And then it completely passed, and it's never happened since. But if it kept happening, I'd go to see the doctor. I wouldn't wait a year. He did his best to conceal this issue, but it would only get worse. The quality of his work suffered greatly as a result, but Heinz cut him plenty of slack, knowing of Arno's difficulties. On particularly bad days, Heinz would drop his duties and take Arno for a stroll along the nearby railway tracks, hoping that this act of emotional support would help him in some way. Heinz sounds like an absolute legend. This sounds like a super nice dude. And in fact, the symptoms appeared to slowly diminish over time, not because the actual problem disappeared, but because Arno had developed and adapted strategies to appear functional to the outside world despite his inner suffering. At some point, his coping mechanisms had become so effective that he managed to continue his job as a spray painter without drawing unfavorable attention from his co-workers, and this was quite the dramatic irony. You see, many years later, it would be discovered that the lack of car paint was to blame for his neurological deterioration. Toxic particles had entered his circulation through his lung tissue, gradually accumulating in his brain and causing severe damage over time. The devastating side effects of spray paint were mostly unknown or disregarded at the time, meaning he would continue to inhale even more poison for years to come. A simple face mask could have prevented all of this. Dude, spray painting without masks just seems so insane today.
Yeah,
it's like, aerosolizing something that goes and stays on a car for years. And just breathing that in, it's like, that's not a good idea.
No, that's not a good idea.
The stuff that, you see nowadays, and you're like, that's not a good idea.
No, that's not a good idea.
I don't know, pollution in cities and stuff. You'd just be wandering along like a bus, and you're like, oh, breathing that in. It's probably not good for me, is it? And I imagine in like years, people would be like, yeah. No. There were internal combustion engines in cities, like in densely populated areas where people lived permanently. And people were like, that's insane. Didn't they realize how bad it was? It was like, yeah, not really. As the 1980s drew to a close, Arno hit rock bottom. He was both bodily and mentally broken. His life was devoid of meaning and passion, and his quest for happiness had led him to an abyss. On all levels, except physical, he considered himself dead. But with this ultimate resignation came a strange, rekindled drive. Arno was aware of having nothing left to lose, so why not go all in? Among all the things he tried in order to finally be happy, there was one thing he had not attempted yet. A strategy that, by all appearances, was guaranteed to work. It may seem shallow, but according to his observation, the super happy all had one characteristic in common. They were also super rich. Is that, I guess, on the outside? But it's like, are rich people happier?
Yes, they are.
I mean, I used to not have much money, and now I have more money, and I think I'm about the same happy. It's just like, stays the same. I'm more satisfied, I think. Like, I get quite a lot of satisfaction, but happiness, I don't know if that really changes that much, does it? Following this logic, Arno decided that becoming incomprehensibly wealthy would be his last shot of finding happiness. He also concluded that, as a virtually dead person, he had no negative consequences to fear whatsoever, so he might as well try the criminal path right away. This is amazing. This is like some Walter White. This random thought nestled itself into his brain like a brand new operating system, a completely overhauled self-image that shaped his decision-making. He could assassinate the Pope if he wanted to. He could strip stark naked in the middle of the street and pretend to be a gorilla. Who was to stop him? And by what means? As a corpse on probation, he was pretty much invulnerable. In fact, he did not have to ponder for long until he identified the appropriate target for his get-rich-fast plan. Arno set his sights on a very familiar institution that proudly stood as a melting pot for happiness and money, seemingly unlimited amounts of money, the Mall of the West. During the research phase of this episode, I consulted a certified psychotherapist who, among other things, specializes in working with former criminals. God, that's got to be an interesting job. Just like analyzing criminals. I will elaborate on her input later on, but I think it is important to emphasize a couple of things at this point. First and foremost, we're not diagnosing anyone in any way. Yet, to her professional eyes, it did seem possible that Arno was suffering from major clinical depression. Yeah, as I was saying, this is treatable. That like black hole inside himself, that like pit of despair. There are 1980s, there are drugs for that. Given that Arno himself would later publicly agree to this assessment on multiple occasions, I think it's fair to let that stand as a working hypothesis. I decided to include this insertion right away to point out the following. There are effective treatments for depressive disorders. If you recognize a pinch of your own mental state in Arno's biography, then please know that help is always available. Being depressed is not a part of your true self, even if it feels like that. It's a disease that plays tricks on your mind. As someone who has suffered from depression in the past, I can guarantee that there is no reason to be ashamed, and it is not a sign of weakness either. I actually mean it. You can tell someone. You can tell someone right now. Yeah, entirely agree. It's like, it's just a trick, and it can be fixed, like, most of the time, which is cool. Arno had also been a man of data, facts, and figures. Thus, he thought little of mysticism and the supernatural. Nevertheless, he could not shake the feeling that destiny was steering him in a certain direction. As a positive byproduct of his disastrous childhood, he held immense knowledge of technology and chemistry, and as luck would have it, he also had access to a fully equipped workshop thanks to his job. The plot to build a bomb materialized all by itself. Despite these fortunate starting conditions, there were still plenty of hurdles ahead. Building a bomb is neither easy nor without risk, especially considering Arno's unpredictable bursts of sudden dizziness. Any technical blunder would result in instant death. Also, Jesus Christ, he's like, oh, I really hope I don't have one of those spray paint blackouts right now. What? Also, without the internet, suitable blueprints were hard to come by. In modern times, of course, everyone knows about the casual criminalist, the world's #1 learning resource for criminally insane. Oh, someone pointed this out the other day, that it's like, oh my god, we dive into these so deep, and Simon points at everything that's wrong, that it started off as a joke that this would be helpful to criminals, and now it's like, oh my god, it is actually helpful to criminals, which is kind of bad. But in the late 1980s, people had to cope without Simon's helpful guidance, which made things incomprehensibly more difficult. Furthermore, the project required a considerable upfront investment, as the individual components and some specialized tools had to be acquired. In fact, the lack of funds caused the biggest delay to the plan, but nonetheless, Arno made steady progress. It's just had a super weird thought. But it's like, YouTube's been demonetizing so many of my episodes lately that I should just become a criminal consultant. It's like, you want to commit a crime? I'm your guy. I'll consult with you. I've learned a lot about crime while not being a criminal. Don't get any ideas. I'm not doing that. It's just a joke.
Fine. I'll do it.
The bomb was not the only invention that sprang from his ingenuity. Planning several moves in advance, he also devised a method for the subsequent money handover, a novel, madcrap strategy that required a pulley system, a diving suit, and 2 more gadgets that he needed to assemble in addition to the explosive device. These were the most productive weeks of his life. By day, he worked diligently at his job, painting cars with a steady hand and an artist's touch. His colleagues were oblivious to the secret Arno carried within him, yet they did notice that he seemed increasingly, well, happy. Yeah, I remember this. Like, I've had times in my life where it's like now I feel like I've been working on the same things for like a long time. Like, sometimes I'll start a new YouTube channel or whatever, and it's like, yeah, let's go. And even that's now kind of like, okay, yeah, that's what I do. But like, I remember like back in the day when you'd be starting a new project, you'd be like, this is amazing. And I'll be in the office for like 12 hours, 14 hours, just working on some new thing and just being excited and being like, yes, we're doing this, we're doing that, let's go. And
Magic is gone.
yeah, no, I feel that. I wasn't like making bombs. But I feel that, like, the rush of finding something new and exciting. At closing time, he would bid his co-workers farewell with a big smile on his face, pretending to head home for the night. But home was far from his destination. He would simply slip around the corner and wait, his heart pounding with excitement as he listened to the fading footsteps of his colleagues. When he was certain that Hines and the others had disappeared, he would sneak back into the workshop and continue tinkering on his devices. The workshop was transformed into an entirely different world in the moonlit hours. His blowtorch cast dancing shadows onto the walls as the scent of oil and metal mingled with the cool night air. Arno's heart swelled every time he approached his secret project, the very thing that consumed his waking thoughts and sweetened his dreams. This is fascinating. Like, he's like, fuck it. I've got nothing less to lose. I was going to kill myself. That was my path. I was so depressed. That's my path. And it's like, fuck. Let's become a criminal. Let's go. What have I got to lose? Nothing. And it seems like he's actually found something that genuinely excites him, which is kind of awesome. He had never experienced such joy, such passion in any other pursuit. He would pore through books about electrical engineering, scavenge through scrap dealers' yards for the perfect parts, and draw detailed sketches by the flickering light of a single bulb dangling over his head. The sound of turning screws became a symphony that accompanied his newfound sense of purpose. His brain rewarded him with frequent rushes of endorphins for a change, and he found himself thriving in the world of danger. Arno lived and breathed the fun in dysfunctional. At times, as he collapsed into his bed at the end of a grueling day, he was embraced by a peculiar comforting sensation. It was the anticipation of living another day. The Da Vinci of crime. In the spring of 1988, Arno stood back to admire his creation with an air of pride. The bomb, concealed as an unassuming cardboard box, was nothing short of a masterpiece. He had laboured over every intricate detail, ensuring that not a single telltale sign would reveal the nature of its contents. Arno knew that once set in motion, the box would change the course of his life. As the fateful day dawned, Arno found himself at the entrance of the Mall of the West, his masterpiece cradled in a nondescript plastic bag. His palms were sweaty, knees weak, arms were heavy. Getting that reference there, Dennis. He was nervous, but on the surface he looked calm and ready, pleading, blending in with the throngs of shoppers who milled about. Days earlier, he had scouted the perfect location for his sinister plot, a quiet, unremarkable corner in the toy section. With a surreptitious glance to ensure he was unobserved, he set the box in place, made sure it was out of the reach of children, and activated the timer, scheduling its detonation for the early hours in the morning when the mall would be devoid of life. I still would have put this in the toy section. I'd go put it in like the old person's, like where they sell those, You know those weird bags that old people wheel around behind them? Like, that's where I'll put it, not in the toy section. Because it's like, I'm sure my bomb is a masterpiece, but just in case I'm going to blow some people up, I'd rather blow up 2 old people than some kids. Because I hate old people. Just kidding. I love old people. From the very outset, Arno had been determined to avoid human casualties at all costs. His ethical compass would not allow him to sacrifice innocent lives for his own gain, even if it meant forgoing the strategic advantage that leverage would afford him. He also understood that killing people would have garnered more attention, more power. But Arno's underlying sense of justice would not yield to this temptation. For those familiar with true crime stories, the broad strokes of Arno's story might seem all too predictable. Time and time again, the world has witnessed a childhood marred by abuse, isolation, and negligence, which can breed violent attributes. But Arno was an exception to this grim pattern. I honestly think most people are an exception to this grim pattern. Sure, there's a pattern on the Casual Criminalist because it's a true crime podcast, but most people who come from childhoods marred by abuse, isolation, and negligence grow up to be
rappers, those athletes, those YouTubers.
I mean, people with bad childhoods. They're not all monsters. Most people are not monsters. It just increases the chance of you becoming a monster. I also don't think Arno's a monster. He had never tortured animals, never harmed his peers, and never exhibited a propensity for deception or stealing prior to, his crime series revolving around deception and stealing. Up to this point, he was the embodiment of careful calculation and prudent restraint. Heck, as far as I know, he wasn't even into questionable pornography like a normal person. As he left the ball empty-handed, a potent... Dennis, you're doing nothing to help with German stereotypes there, mate. As he left the ball empty-handed, a potent cocktail of excitement and terror coursed through his veins, but the emotion that weighed heaviest upon him was guilt. He was under no illusions about the morality of his actions, and he did not commit this crime out of some twisted sense of righteousness. Yet he rationalized it as a necessary evil, one that he had to embrace in order to survive. Before heading home, he tossed the ransom note into the mall's mailbox. Arno did not manage to fall asleep that night, not even with the help of a drink or 5. His thoughts were consumed by the possibility that someone, despite his best efforts, might come to harm. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, he obsessively monitored every news channel, anticipating the breaking story of his nefarious plot. But to his astonishment, not a single report mentioned an explosion. As the hours ticked by, and still no news of his bomb surfaced, suspicion and unease began to gnaw at Arno's already frayed nerves. Unable to quell the mounting dread, he eventually succumbed to the urge to investigate. Still slightly inebriated, he climbed into his car and spread back to the department store. Upon arriving, Arno's gaze was immediately drawn to a small slip of paper affixed to the corner of the main entrance door. A white sticky note adorned by a single green dot. The sight brought a wave of relief washing over Arno. In his ransom letter, he'd explicitly requested the company to signal their willingness to pay via precisely this sign. So they had both received and accepted his demands. What about the bomb? Perhaps it had been discovered and defused in the nick of time, he reasoned. Then again, it no longer mattered. The green dot served as a promise, a guarantee that he was about to receive his much-needed windfall. Does he need the windfall? He doesn't need the money. He's just gonna want the money. Arno had done his homework. In the movies, extortionists usually requested the money to be put in a public waste bin and also do not call the police. But he was not that naive. Obviously, they'd get the police involved no matter what, so he had come up with a plan to fool them. Actually, let's go through it from the perspective of the investigators and maybe put up that galaxy brain meme. Because this one is nothing short of a magic trick. It's admittedly somewhat complicated, so I included a sketch of the setup. Act 1. The Pledge. Picture yourself as a seasoned detective. A ransom note had arrived just days before, directing you to a unique radio frequency at a specific time and date. Your task, to tune in for additional instructions. No way. It's like a movie. You mull over your potential strategies. One of your first ideas is to simply trace the signal back to its origin in order to ensnare the perpetrator. To facilitate this, you bring in your tech squad. They assure you that once the transmission is initiated, they can easily triangulate the signal's source location, so you and your techno wizard set up the necessary equipment in anticipation of the big day. As the appointed hour arrives, your team swiftly identifies the signal and ascertains its point of origin. Wasting no time, you jump into your vehicle, making a beeline for the signal's source, as indicated on your radar. But what you find is far from what you expected. Upon investigating the area, you discover not an extortionist, but a self-made gadget, a radio transmitter connected to a cassette recorder and a timer, all taped to a random tree in the heart of a bustling public park. The apparatus had sent the instructions autonomously. Annoyed by this successful feint, you listen intently as the looping tape crackles to life, the distorted and unrecognizable voice barely discernible amid the static. It speaks of a nearby lake, where you are to deliver the ransom money. With your trusted police colleagues by your side, you gather the cash and drive to the designated body of water. The sun dips below the horizon as you arrive. You cautiously step onto a small wooden jetty, the old planks creaking underfoot. At the end of a footbridge, you discover a small box connected to a steel cable, the other end disappearing into the dark, still surface of the lake. This is so crazy. This is such a plan. Where's it go? How's he going to get that money? He's like, oh, is he in the diving suit? They said there was a diving suit involved earlier, right? Is he under the water? Is he in the lake right now? Act 2. The Turn. You place the money into the box, as requested. As soon as you release your grip, the box springs to life, plunging into the lake with a resounding splash. It seemed as if the steel cable had pulled the box off the jetty, broadly into the direction of the opposing shore. You deduce the extortionist must be hiding on the other side of the lake, pulling in the money like a fisherman reels in a catch. With adrenaline surging through your veins, you and your police team race around the pond, determined to apprehend the criminal before he could pull the loot across the depths of the water. Gasping for breath, you and your team reach the opposite bank, only to find it eerily deserted. No sign of the extortionist, no box full of money, no steel cable. You're left to puzzle over your predicament, failing to notice that the climax is already unfolding back on the wooden walkway. What? And what? They wouldn't have police still at the walkway? I feel like you arrive and he's racing rounds, but surely some police are left there. Or like at least watching it or something, no? And even if they're not, surely that's a risk that Arno's thinking about. That they might. Act 3. The Prestige. As you and your team are busy scratching your heads, desperately trying to figure out where the ransom had gone, the mastermind emerges from his hiding spot close to the jetty, back on the other side of the lake. Casually steps out to collect the money from beneath the wooden planks. He climbs down between the reeds, grabs the box and leaves. So how's this possible? Well, let me explain. No person had been reeling in the wire manually. Instead, a self-built winch, complete with a battery-powered waterproof engine, had been responsible.
Your skill has
for
increased.
Days earlier, Arno had dived to the depths of the leak to fix this ingenious device in place. As the gears started to turn, the container had only appeared to be moving across the water, but in truth, the pulley system attached to the bottom of the lake had redirected it straight back to where it came from. The steel wire pulled the money only a few misleading meters towards the middle of the lake, then directed it back under the pier, perfectly poised for retrieval. A fairly convoluted plan, if you ask me. While the basic idea shows appeal in the abstract, I couldn't help but notice the multitude of variables that were simply out of
Your
Arno's
skill has
control.
increased.
But was it ultimately successful? Unfortunately, this is bound to remain a mystery. You see, even though the Mall of the West management had initially agreed to comply with Arno's demands, the authorities intervened, instructing them to hold off on any payments for strategic reasons. Therefore, this marvelous magic trick was never performed. The investigators did triangulate the signal, they did discover the autonomous transmission device, they did investigate the lake, but they never put any money in the box. The police's refusal to play by Arno's rules had set him on edge. His aspirations of criminal supremacy were proving futile. Even worse, his operations were running in the red. Setting up the underwater mechanism had drained his legal resources even further, and to add insult to injury, the authorities wouldn't even dignify it with fake money. Feeling dismissed, underestimated in this epic battle of brains, Arno knew that he had to promptly adjust their worldview. So, it was back to the drawing board. Once again, days turned into nights as Arno's mind buzzed with activity, refining his gadgets and strategies, seeking the flaw that had derailed his previous plan.
Your skill has increased.
The flaw is that they're not taking him seriously, so he needs to do another bomb or two until they take him seriously. Before long, he had discovered a logical error in the electrical switching circuits of the bomb it built. Oh, okay, of course the bomb never went off, so they just discovered it. An error that
your skill has increased.
Although the details of the issue were quite fascinating from an engineering standpoint, my kill drive and editor emphatically advised me to leave out the details. Editor's note: I'm probably on a list just for downloading your original manuscripts.
Most of you are on the list.
Yeah. Don't go too much into bomb-making instructions. It's even probably
your skill has
bomb-making
increased.
Instructions. It's probably not a good thing to send. Now we're all on lists, Dennis. Undeterred, Arno set to work on a new bomb, an improved version. The process moved swiftly this time, as he had learned from his previous trials and errors. He also devised a simpler method of the money transfer, one that didn't involve diving into murky waters or constructing elaborate machinery. He aimed for efficiency, something less complicated, but no less clever. Less than a month later, Arno was ready to strike again. Disguised as a sales representative, he slipped into the Mall of the West, clutching a grey briefcase with explosive contents. He knew the mall detectives would be on high alert, and he couldn't rule out the possibility of undercover police officers lurking between the customers. His heart raced as he made his way to the sports department, feigning interest in various items to blend in with the crowd. When he was certain that he had not aroused suspicion, Arno placed the briefcase on the floor, triggering a small switch on the underside. A concealed flap sprung open, releasing the pipe bomb, which silently rolled under a nearby shelf in a matter of milliseconds. With sweat beading on his brow, Arno picked up the empty briefcase and made his escape as if nothing had happened. That night, alcohol was once again the only solace that could lull him to sleep. Yet around midnight, a distant bang jolted him from his slumber. Panic surged through him, his synapses firing wildly as he wondered if the noise was real or merely a figment of his imagination. But as it turned out, the bomb had indeed worked this time. The explosion decimated the sports section in an instant, the resulting pillar of smoke triggering the mall's sprinkler system. Goods on every floor were drenched, damaged or destroyed, with a total cost of destruction reaching 250,000 German marks, more than double what Arno had initially demanded. Fortunately, no one was injured, the store areas having been completely deserted just as he had predicted. May 25th, 1988 marked the day of Arno's first successful bombing, the inaugural act in a series of 6 that would follow. Arno couldn't believe that he had literally blown up Germany's largest department store. It felt unreal and vastly different from what he had imagined. The preparation phase had been filled with excitement and a sense of success, but now that he saw the aftermath on the news channel, he felt like Arno's neurological impairment, already a heavy burden, now seemed to weigh him down even more. His steps faltered, and his overstimulated nerves screamed for relief, driving him to numb the pain with high-proof alcohol. His conscience demanded him to surrender at the nearest police station immediately. His logical intelligence told him to go ahead with his plan, and the darkness of his soul enticed him to obtain a new gun. To regain control of his thoughts, he chose to resume regular work for a couple of days without doing anything regarding his crime. Yet despite his best efforts, he could not restrain himself from following the investigation closely. To his relief, however, there seemed to be hardly any progress, meaning that Arno soon felt sufficiently bold to arrange the second money handover operation. Similar to the previous attempt, he transmitted the instructions via autonomous receiver, which he had in a treetop. He declared June the 2nd as the date for the next phase, which gave him more than a month for further preparations. He had shelved the idea of underwater cable winches because in retrospect he found the unpredictable nature of such a scheme to be unworkable. But what was the proper solution? He wasn't sure yet. Inspiration struck during a walk along the railroad tracks near the auto repair shop where he worked. How about dropping the money from a moving train? The attentive listener may recall 4 years later, following the second bombing, Arno would also resort to this method. However, in 1988, his plan was simpler, even a little half-baked. I feel like just having someone on board just throw it out the window. Just be like, okay, I'm going to radio you. You're going to be traveling on this train, officer, with this bag of money. And at some point, I'm going to phone you or radio you or something. I'm going to send a signal. And you're going to have to throw the bag out of the window at that point. And that's where I am. And by the time you scramble police there, I'm already going to be gone. That seems quite simple. Maybe it's a little bit half-baked. But that's kind of the sort of thing I'd think of. Just a bag of money thrown out of a window. One could perhaps imagine that Arno had used his remaining preparation time to conjure up.
I'm going to use my stream to try and kill Microsoft. I'm going to use my stream to try and kill Microsoft, and I think they're going to try and kill me. Like Danny Casolero. I'm going to use my stream to try and kill Microsoft. I believe they have been so corporately malfeasant that they have essentially doomed America's future by doing things like holding software back 30 years and giving our boys in the military Windows 95 NT and working with the Nazis in World War II, selling them computers. And that's the last complaint, and that's the one that matters, because if they do it again, if they sell computers to our enemies, they will use it to kill us in war. And so I am going to I declare on my stream, it's a monumental moment for me at 4:35 p.m. at 8/5/24. You know, I'm gonna go say it. I'm declaring war. I'm declaring war. It's a monumental moment for me. It's kind of crazy, but it is. I'm crying because it's a monumental moment for me. I'm going to go to war with Microsoft. And I told my best friends just now. I was texting my best friends. I was like, I'm going to war with Microsoft. I told them. I'm going to war with Microsoft. They may try and kill me. declaring war. There it is, E524, that's it. I declare war on Microsoft.
Up a brand new invention from his sleeve, maybe a small crane, a robot, a remote control helicopter, or the like. But this hadn't been the case. Instead, Arno had simply instructed the police to board the rear wagon of a designated train and prepare themselves to hurl a fortune out of the window upon his commands. Exactly! Though rudimentary in comparison to his masterful, fully automated drop-in mechanism of 1992, the essence of his cunning remained intact. With the investigators in the dark
because I don't want to go to war with Microsoft. I just want to be a video game streamer. I don't want to go to war with Microsoft. They're probably going to kill my family. I don't want to go to war with Microsoft. Maybe I shouldn't go to war with Microsoft, but I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't go to war with Microsoft, but I think I am. I think I'm going to go fight Microsoft. I told him, I told my best friends, I literally said it how I meant it. I declare war right here, right now, 4:37 p.m. on 8/5/24. I declare war with Microsoft, and if I don't make it, avenge my death, because I think they'll kill me. I think they'll kill me. I think they'll kill me. If I don't make it, avenge my death. That's like literally what I said to him. I'm going to go to war with Microsoft. It means something. It's going to go crazy. I'm going to tell people every day how bad Microsoft is. Every day I'm going to fucking yell and I'm going to cry about it. I'm going to go to war with Microsoft in a way where I hope that people actually listen. And maybe I can do something with it, you know? Microsoft is an evil corporation. I'm gonna put it right on my stream title. I'm going to war with Microsoft. I declare war against an American entity. I'm crazy. I'm crazy. I'm going to war with Microsoft. I'm going to try and kill them. I'm crazy. I don't care. I'll use the platform. I don't think, you know, I'm not going to do it all day. I'm not going to talk about Microsoft all day. I'm going to play my video games, but every day I'm going to bring up IBM and the Holocaust. Ongoing sales. I told him it's an easy enough solution. Make it so that any citizen can log into irs.gov and see where Microsoft got their money from that day. It's an easy enough solution. And if they sell computers to Palestine. I'm sorry, I'm just telling my friends. I'm just telling my friends. I don't think you can help me other than tell people. I don't think you guys can help me with this one. Other than tell people safely. Do it in a safe manner.